Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I wanted to take us through and start a little discussion about some tarot trials, some things that we as readers, readers for other people primarily, might encounter, obstacles, setbacks, conflicts of interest, basically anything that makes the reading process with a client that can make it a little bit more difficult, that presents a challenge to us, things that aren't the easiest to navigate and that a lot of us learn to navigate through trial and error and experience. So I know that this is something that a lot of these things are situations I've been in, experiences I've had, and the solutions I have are based mostly on what I've found to work for me. So that's not to say that I think that they will work always for you, or that I think that they will always work for me in every circumstance. But I do think it's really valuable to have these sorts of dialogues and resources and discussions where we can talk about our experiences, and I can share something that's happened with me and how I navigate that type of scenario. And in turn, in the comments, I would love to see from people that have encountered certain obstacles, maybe that I haven't, or similar ones, but who handled it or do handle it a lot differently than me. I'm very open to that. I think that having like a network of people who like to do readings like tarot, oracle, this can broaden even into different types of service type readings, astrology, etc. But I think having like a network where we as readers can kind of have those dialogues and spaces where we can discuss in a more professional sense uh, our readings and the things that we encounter in our professional reading lives. I quoted that because I don't think that this is necessarily just for people that read for money or have clients or are part of a business. I think that if you read for anybody other than yourself, or even ever have, even if it's just, not just, but even if you read for your family or friends, or occasionally you read for an acquaintance, or something like that, if you've even ever read for anybody other than yourself, then I think that this applies to you too. So I don't want this to seem like something that's really exclusive, when the whole purpose is actually to be extremely inclusive for anybody who likes to read tarot, and just has a resource maybe for learning about certain things they may encounter when reading for others. So yeah, that's, I guess, my little preface. Getting into it, some big areas I wanted to touch upon and talk about my experience in facing are conflicts of interest. Those can be interesting. I want to talk about really raw or heightened emotions with a querent or client. I want to talk about maybe obstinacy. Obstinacy, or being closed off to what you're saying and messages. And the fourth being those who, or situations where maybe a querent or client has their own interpretations of the cards that they don't agree with, or they have their own interpretation of the cards, you have yours, and they're not in agreement with what it is that you're interpreting. So this would be sort of the contrarian. That's what I'll call this fourth category. So conflicts of interest are, all of these topics are a bit broad in nature. So this can be things like where you're in a situation where it's a catch-22, and I faced this in reading for acquaintances or family friends, people that I know through other people, or who are kind of in my sphere but I don't actually see very often, but I know a decent amount about their life because friends or family that do know them more closely are sometimes just in passing saying things like, "Oh, I saw so and so today. This is how they are," kind of thing. And then I've gotten to a reading, or I've done specifically. There's one where I went to do a reading. I didn't even consider this scenario before heading in. Otherwise, I maybe would have headed it off at the pass, but I sat down with this person and they were paying me. I was reading in a shop. I hadn't seen them in a very long time. They came to show their support. which was really nice of them, and I was so happy to see them as well. But I began doing the reading, and this was more in my, I would say, earlier times as a reader, before I don't know, had encountered many situations that were difficult. But midway through the reading, I was realizing that certain cards were coming up, and I was altering how I was interpreting them based on what I knew about their life but shouldn't know, that they hadn't told me personally, but that I'd heard from my family in passing. And I didn't feel comfortable, say, going into something about like romance when I know that they're going through a divorce that's not public, things like that. So uh, it can become difficult. And of course, at that time, I was very early in my reading um, experience, and as a reader, I was very new as a reader. And I think that now, even before going into reading, I would consider, if it's somebody that I know, if I feel like there would be any sort of conflict of interest or awkward scenario that might inhibit my ability to deliver a reading of the level and accuracy that I like to hold myself to. And in that circumstance, that was in jeopardy, and the reading suffered. And as an early reader, I didn't know what to do. I very awkwardly navigated the situation and tried to keep my cool and not alert them to the fact that I knew certain things about them that I probably shouldn't have, or just didn't know yet because they hadn't personally told me. Likewise, I think when you're reading for friends or family, people that you know, this is a lot of times when you will face those conflicts of interest, and you find yourself changing how you might interpret a card because you suddenly remembered something about them that makes you want to switch your natural inclination of whatever the card is. Maybe there's a fool somewhere and it's in an area of their life that seems very stable, and like there isn't a lot of newness or change or a shift or that excited fun, all those things we associate with the fool. Maybe there's an area of their life and we go to, say, interpret that, and normally maybe with a client you might be more willing to sort of speak off the cuff and exactly as the card feels to you in that given moment, maybe based on the other cards. And then with someone that we know, we are prepared to deliver the message how we would normally, or how it feels to us, and then we have that analytical block where we're thinking about what it is that we know of them that is kind of almost wanting us to shift, or eventually ends up having us shift the way that we deliver a message, to the point where it's not authentic, or it's not as we planned to originally or felt it intuitively. So those, I would say, are all potential conflicts of interest. I would say now, today, I, for the most part, don't enter readings that I think there will be a conflict of interest in at all. And I'll just tell people, if they're coming with a specific inquiry and I don't feel comfortable given who they are with that type of inquiry, that I don't think that it's for the best. I want them to get the most that they can out of a reading, and if I don't think that I can deliver, or that they will get something beneficial or authentic from the reading, if I don't think I can deliver that, then no, I don't want you to, say, waste your time, money, or to suffer, or to get to wind up more confused or something like that. So yeah, I'll refrain from that. Likewise, a lot of the time, if it's like a close family member or friend, I'd rather just not charge them and almost make it a fun experience, in the case that, say, something arises that is a situation where I know something about them that starts to influence the reading, and that way I do feel comfortable sharing that with them in the reading, because I'm not, say, charging them, or almost treating them as a client. Because if I'm charging and treating someone more so as a client, I'm holding myself to a very, very high level of reading, what I expect to come out of the reading for them. To me, it's unacceptable to have that conflict of interest and still charge someone, because you've then compromised the reading. So That's how I navigate that. I sort of just try to head it off before it starts. If you find yourself in the middle of that, I think being as upfront and honest as possible, especially if there's money involved, because as a reader, um, you owe something to somebody who has paid you for that service, and if you don't think that you can deliver on that service, then that's something that they need to be made aware of. So that's my thought on that. Um, Now, going into the raw emotion, or heightened emotion, I should say, in a reading, and how that can influence, sorry, low battery on the phone, how that can kind of present an obstacle as a reader. I would say more often than not, I encounter heightened emotion that is negative in nature when somebody comes to reading, because usually you are coming because you're not okay, or not all is well, or you're looking for answers, or something big in a negative way has happened and you're looking for direction, or guidance, insight. So I would say as a reader, you'll probably encounter, when you do see heightened emotion, more so like things like sorrow, grief, anxiety, um, even potentially anger in some instances, things like that. There are some circumstances that are a little bit, I guess, present a nicer obstacle, where somebody's overly excited about something happening in their life, and that's why they've come for a reading to kind of learn more about it. Maybe they just got a new job and they're moving. Maybe they are buying a house. Maybe they're getting married. Maybe they're in a relationship and they're about to have a child. Maybe they're going through a shift in their sort of like paradigm of like spiritual awakening. So those things happen, and people come to readings to understand those things or to get more insight. And then so that can present heightened emotion as well. Um, when I think that heightened emotion can present an obstacle is when it's very clear that a lot hinges upon the reading. Usually, if somebody's come to you for a reading and they are in a heightened emotional state, they're placing a lot more importance on the reading than a normal person. Not a normal person, not that they aren't normal, than somebody who's in a more placid, controlled, emotionally stable, level place. So the words that you say are going to impact them more. Things that you suggest, they might actually take to heart a lot more. Um, Things like that. And that can put pressure on you as a reader. Say somebody comes and, like, partway through the reading, they're teary eyed. You've discovered that they've just lost someone. Um, Suddenly you are a little bit wary about how you're going to deliver certain harsher messages or negative aspects or obstacles that appear in their reading. Um, and how do you do that? Of course, if somebody shows up and they're in a state that's just completely distraught, or just does not seem at all well, um, of course, I don't think it's a good idea to maybe take on the reading, and maybe to let them know that at this time you don't think that they would get as much from the reading, that it wouldn't be as effective for them as it stands right now, and to maybe reschedule, and that at a later date, hopefully, you'll be able to get a lot more out of the experience. So I think that that can be something that needs to happen when somebody clearly arrives in that state and it's very present or visible. But if it's something that becomes a little bit more present within the reading, and navigating that, I think that's when you kind of have to put on your eloquent shoes and really figure out how you want to deliver the messages. Um, if they're very sad, if they're going through a tough time, if they seem very fragile, taking some time to really work through methodically the highlights, what it is that those negative aspects mean in terms of growth, highlighting those things a lot more than we are what the drawbacks will be, or the hardships. Clearly, they're having a tough time already. Just putting emphasis on what those hard things to come, or areas of life that maybe aren't doing so well, isn't what's going to serve them best, or help them to leave the reading feeling as though they have some agency or power. So we need to shift the focus on of what it is that we're talking about and how we're talking about it. Um, Likewise, if you're somebody who, like me, draws maybe clarifier cards or additional cards based on certain circumstances, if someone's in a more fragile or emotional state, drawing those extra cards based on around more positive or constructive things that they can do, actions they can take. Um, if you don't already have positions in the spread or reading for that, taking the time to really add that, potentially, if that's something you do. Likewise, if it is one of those clients that's in a heightened emotional state that is more positively minded, is more of an excited um, feeling, whether they're moving, that new job, that marriage, that relationship, experiences. I think that a lot of what they're coming to is hope, coming to the reading as, or coming to the reading with, is a hope that you will affirm a lot of um, their hopes in terms of these topics that they're excited about, and maybe help to assuage some fears that they have. So although they may be open to messages, that's a lot of the time, if you're excited about something, you're hoping to hear good things about it and to have your fears mollified. So if you say draw the cards, and that's not the case, which I'm sure that in a reading that's not going to be the entire case. Almost, it's rarely going to be the entire case that like all you're going to do is boost that excitement and have zero and to totally quell the fears. But maybe take into account that excitement that they're feeling, and how we can sort of foster that creatively and constructively, to help them to achieve those outcomes and to keep the wave. Because of course, a spike in emotion, excitement is more of a spike in emotion. It's not something that's going to like remain constant. So they are going to eventually come down from that. Likewise, with all heightened emotions, we're going to come down from it, helping them to be in a good place to maybe stabilize, and as they come down, to remain in a really great place is helpful. So the way that we talk about those obstacles and making sure that we're highlighting the benefit that the obstacles have, and using that excitement that they have as energy to maybe put into the way that an obstacle is tackled. Yeah, a lot of what dealing with heightened emotions is wording, being eloquent, where we're placing the emphasis, the dialogue that you're having, just being more of an empathetic human being, and understanding what it is that they've come to the reading for, what it is that you're going to provide to them, and how they can proceed given the messages in a really constructive way that takes advantage of their agency and can hopefully help to keep them and get them to a good place. So that's that. Next, going into more so people that are obstinate to messages. So this goes for skeptics, people that aren't at all open to the idea of certain readings. There's that. There's people that come with a very specific idea of what they want to hear, and when that's not what they're getting, they shut off, or they put up a wall. Maybe they refute what you're saying to some capacity. I'm trying to think what else there is that could kind of fall into that. Yeah, I think those are the two biggest or at least what comes to mind. For the first one, I think that one's easy. If someone's a complete skeptic and they're not at all open to what you're saying, and that's clear either at the beginning, it's usually something that becomes clear either before the start of a reading, or right at the beginning of a reading, to address that. I personally, if I think that that's the case, I will ask them maybe why it is that, if they don't believe at all in what this is or what it can do for them, that they're here. Luckily, I'm trying to think if I faced that at least, I think once maybe. That was about it. And that's, you would hope and you would think that somebody who doesn't at all believe in tarot or these types of readings would why would they ask for a reading? So if there is a case where they do, maybe just asking them about that, and then suggesting that maybe it isn't right for them just because they won't get out of it what you would hope for somebody to get out of a reading, or what they might hope to get out of it, because they are not really vested in any of what you're going to say. So yeah, for that one, I would say obviously understand that that's the case, and then find a nice way to not do the reading, because why would they aren't going to benefit from something they don't believe in. If they're not at all open to any of the messages, then there isn't really a point. Then there's people that come to the reading hoping for, or just of the mindset that they want to hear one certain thing, and they are kind of in disbelief, or unopen, or not so open to any alternatives to that. Maybe they've come and they are in a relationship, and they just want to affirm certain things. Maybe they're not in the best, like, okay, we're gonna go hypothetical on their end and say that, like, maybe they are just in a I don't know, a rocky relationship. They come to you, that what they really want to hear is that all is going to be well. They even say to you that all is well. You draw some cards, and it does seem like there are some obstacles. There are some things that are unaddressed. There are some things that are presenting further issue for them, and not that the end is like, not that they need to end things necessarily, because I'm never going to tell someone what they should or should not do, but that things do look rough. And you start to go into that, maybe certain areas of the communication, things that are not being said, and high emotions that are not being addressed, boundaries, all these things that the cards are maybe telling me about in terms of this relationship. And they kind of, I would say that there's those who will outright refute and say, like, no, that's not the case. And if that's the case, then I would say that that's a little bit more rare than the outright refuting of the message. I would say I haven't really encountered as much of that, but more so you might get somebody who shuts down, who is very closed off and quiet. If you ask them about how it is that they're feeling based about these messages, if they have questions, things like that, that they are kind of just nodding and not really giving you much, and then at the end they kind of are like, well, I don't feel like that's the case, and actually this and that. And of course, as a reader, you don't know actually what's going on, so you can't be always 100% sure that they're closed off, which is interesting too. I mean, maybe things, maybe your message is actually the case and they're not open to it. Sometimes they make it clear that they're just not open to it. There's a lot. The big takeaway here is just that you can't control how somebody receives a message, if they're going to be open to it. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So, yes, ultimately they have the control and agency, and they decide what it is that they want to believe, and if they're going to hear it. You can hope that hopefully down the line, if the message is really pertinent and applicable, that they will internalize it, and eventually it will mean something for them, but you can't force them in that moment to be receptive to what it is that you're saying if they aren't willing. So, yeah, that's just that. I think with that case, you need to, sometimes it can feel like a hard blow as a reader, and it makes you question your own abilities. If you are on the fence about whether it is that it's just them being closed off to the message, or maybe you start to think, oh, am I just not a very good reader? But I think it becomes more clear when it's like anything that's at all negative or constructive, or an obstacle, and that's what they are more refuting, then they're probably more closed off, I would say, more often than not. Yeah, and the last category that I have is more so for people who have their own opinions on what it is that you're doing in a reading, and have their own, are kind of also doing their own mini reading for themselves at the same time, but it's not in alignment with what it is that you're doing. I would say that the people that fall into this category more so are not those who, I would say when you are more proficient in tarot and you do read for yourself and you know the meanings of the cards at least, any of that, I think you've gotten to the point where you have maybe this respect or reverence for what it means to actually do a reading, and you're not going to interject constantly with your own interpretations or refuting what a reader's interpretations are. So I think that most of us and most people at all, even if you just read for yourself, if you actually do that at all, you won't necessarily be in this boat very likely. I think this is people who dabble or maybe just never fully invest, and they kind of just know some of the cards, or maybe they've gotten a lot of readings themselves, or they have a deck that they play with every once in a while. And sometimes you do get people that, yeah, they like to just, you're talking about the meaning of a card, how it's interpreted based on like the position, what your intuitive feeling on it is, in connection with other things that are happening. Maybe you're bringing in some like correspondences, like astrology, the elements, some symbolism in the card, and they disagree. And then they offer, say, well, actually, I think that the star here is speaking to direction for going towards this, and they're kind of like laying on what it is that they think, and you were going in a different direction with the card. And I think that that is something that in a reading just kind of needs to be addressed. Um, I like to have discussion based readings, where clients are really involved and where they can tell me what it is that they're thinking as I'm delivering messages, where I'll ask them questions. And I really do like when they, like a client or querent interacts and we're having like this like very two-sided dialogue. But if someone's taking, say, like their knowledge of the cards, or when I usually find this is people who maybe don't entirely know the cards, and they're like, well, isn't this that? So actually, shouldn't that be this? And I haven't had this too much, but it has happened. And just kind of maybe stopping the reading, not stopping the reading, but putting a pause and letting them know that this is the way that you interpret the cards, and that you as a reader deliver your messages in the way that they feel right to you and are authentic to you for the client. And that if that isn't something, if they would like to do a reading for themselves, that that's something that they can do. But here and now they are receiving a reading from you, and that is the case. I just try to keep it nice, I guess. I don't think, I mean, I would say more often than not, this isn't like a malicious thing, although a couple of times, not a couple, but like once I did have it where it did kind of feel like they just thought that one, that they knew more and that they were right and I was wrong, and that makes me question why they even wanted a reading in the first place, and that they didn't just do it for themselves. So that was interesting. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that that's a common one at all, but it is something that I've faced in reading for others in spaces that are a little bit more spiritually minded. Um, yeah, and I mean, we all probably, I mean, if you're watching this, I don't know, I like to get like readings from other people, but I very rarely will at all reference anything in terms of tarot when like actually talking to the reader, just because it's their reading. And if they choose to read the star card as something entirely different, something that doesn't at all, isn't a direction that I've ever taken the card, then that's their style of reading, and I respect that. So that's why I say that that's something that I mostly see with people who um, don't really read for themselves or others very often or proficiently, because once you start to actually do readings for yourself or do readings for others, you do start to get this, there is like a reverence that you have for yourself as a reader or for others as readers, and their practice, their art, the way that it has developed for them. So I would say that this is something that I mostly see with people who are dabbling in more metaphysical and spiritually minded tools, but aren't like, don't actually do full on readings for themselves, but just maybe have gotten a bunch or play with the cards. So it's kind of that in between type of person that I've seen, that I mostly or have at all seen this with. Yeah. So that would just be one where you need to address it in the situation, maybe nip it in the bud for the sake of getting, so that they can get a nice reading and you can continue to deliver the messages. Yeah. So those are just a few different obstacles or areas of difficulty, I would say, or just like interesting challenge areas I faced in readings, and a little bit on how I handled them. So I'd be really curious to know what sort of challenges or obstacles you guys have faced and what methods you have, I don't know, enacted or performed or done to remedy those, or how you proceed in the face of certain obstacles or harder aspects that come with being a reader. It's a really, I think that that's really interesting. Of course, it's very rewarding, and I wouldn't read for others if I didn't think that. So I don't hope this didn't come across as like complaining or being negative about readings. I would say like 95% of my readings are like clients and querents have been like really awesome, and then there's been like just a couple where minor challenges, and then I would say like maybe like the 1% have been like the really difficult ones. And I think that's just like people in general and society in general, and who's difficult and easy to get along with and personalities clashing. These things happen. Anyway, please let me know what you guys think about these certain obstacles and challenges, and also what you guys have faced, because I really like to hear these stories and your guys' solutions for things like this. So yeah, until next time, bye.